Welcome to Ecosystem Model Part 2. Make sure you have your PowerPoint guided notes and you are filling them in as you go through this lesson. In this PowerPoint, we're going to focus on the question, how do factors such as food, water, shelter, and space affect populations in an ecosystem? To answer this question, we're going to look at two things. One, how an ecosystem is organized or arranged. And two, biotic factors, those living things in the ecosystem, and abiotic factors, those non-living things in an ecosystem. As you recall from PowerPoint 1, ecosystems fall into two categories: terrestrial, those that exist on land, and aquatic, those that exist in water, be it fresh water or salt water. As we talk about the organization of the ecosystem or how an ecosystem is made up, this information will be applicable or applies to both terrestrial as well as aquatic ecosystems. Locate your ecosystem's flowchart and fill in the appropriate information. As we discuss organization of ecosystems, we will be highlighting the following terms: species, population, community, and ecosystems. There are two steadfast rules in an ecosystem. One, everything is connected to everything else, meaning both biotic and abiotic factors have a direct or indirect effect on an organism. And two, everything must go somewhere in an ecosystem, meaning just like in your law of conservation of matter and your law of conservation of energy, nothing is created or destroyed in an ecosystem. It just changes from one form to the other. When you look at the organization of an ecosystem, you have to start with an organism, which is basically one living thing. Two or more organisms who are so similar, as in the case of the lines below, that they could reproduce and create offsprings who are able to reproduce, are called a species. Quite often, when studying the levels of organization in an ecosystem, you will find organism and species are used interchangeably. There's a good reason for that, because an organism is the individual member of a species. For example, a German Shepherd is in a completely different species from the British long-haired cat. So they will not reproduce and consequently will not create fertile offspring. However, the Chow Chow, although a different breed from the German Shepherd, because they're in the same species, they can reproduce and create fertile offspring. Just as the Persian cat, although a different breed from the British long-haired cat, they can reproduce and create fertile offspring. A population is a group of organisms of the same species living in the same place at the same time, such as the elephants below. Different populations of organisms living in the same area are referred to as a community. As you'll see below, each of these organisms represent a population that typically make up a community in the African savanna. A specific place and conditions where an organism lives is considered its habitat. Sometimes the difference between a habitat and an ecosystem can be a little confusing. A habitat is a very specific place where an organism lives, be it in a tree, in the water, or in or on the ground. While an ecosystem is a community of organisms who might live in various habitats, but they interact with each other and the surrounding environment. Consequently, there can be several habitats in an ecosystem. So, simply stated, we can think of a habitat as being the home inside the village of an ecosystem. So far, you've studied the arrangement of things from the molecular level to the cellular level, and now the ecological level. There is a hierarchy in which all of these levels fit together, as you can see. In the habitat of an ecosystem, competition plays a very important role. Competition is defined as the interaction between individuals or populations for available resources in a specific environment. This plays an important role in population control because only those organisms that are best fit for the conditions in that environment will survive. The competitive exclusion principle states that no two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. So, this brings a question to mind. What is a niche and why is it important to an ecosystem? A niche can be defined as an organism's job or role within its habitat and ecosystem. This can include one, its predator prey relationship, which basically means what types of food does it eat and perhaps what eats it. Two, its structural, physiological, and behavioral adaptation that allow it to survive in its habitat, which simply means how does it obtain food and what does it do to provide shelter and protection to avoid getting eaten. And finally, how does it interact with other biotic factors and the abiotic factors in its environment? In order for an ecosystem to successfully sustain its organisms, there are some needs that must be met. If an ecosystem is unable to provide enough food, then a percentage of the organisms will not survive. Climate refers to the amount of rainfall, sunshine, temperature, and breathable oxygen. These conditions limits the type of organisms that can survive in a particular ecosystem. All organisms require some degree of shelter for protection. All living organisms require water. If water is limited, the ability to support life is also limited. Organisms need space to breed and roam. These are known as limiting factors. Limiting factors in an ecosystem are those abiotic and biotic factors that prevent an organism from flourishing in its environment, either because you have too much of one thing or too little of another. Clearly, the ecosystem where this polar bear lives is lacking one or more limiting factors. Can you name them? We know that habitats are very important in an ecosystem because this is where they must be able to satisfy all of their needs for life as they compete for food, water, shelter, and space. If you've not done so, please fill in your chart now.